They say women are born to be soft, to forgive, to sacrifice, to bend so others don't break. But sometimes it's those very women, the quiet ones, the gentle ones, who endure in silence and then erupt like wildfire. This is the story of a wife betrayed, abandoned while lying in a hospital bed. A woman who once hid her blossoming career, who quietly let her husband believe she was just a housewife, all in the name of keeping peace in a fragile marriage. And then that very husband chose to betray her in the cruelest way by leaving her for her best friend, convinced she was too weak to fight back. But he was wrong, because the silence of a woman isn't surrender, it's accumulation. And when she finally rises, the tiny empire they built on deception will come crashing down by her hand. You're watching Scarlet Vows, where old wounds are rewritten as declarations of vengeance and rebirth. If you believe in justice and rising from betrayal stronger than ever before, then stay with us. Chapter 1. The Reverse Shock. I never thought the day my husband asked for a divorce would be the day I felt so utterly relieved. Thomas walked into the hospital room, his face brimming with pride. He placed the divorce papers on the table like he'd just secured a lucrative deal. Next to him stood Danielle, my best friend, or at least she used to be. She was smiling as if she'd just won a grand prize, her arm clinging tightly to his, as if to announce to the world he's mine now. "You don't work, so you'll have to pay me $1,000 a month in alimony," Thomas said matter-of-factly. "Fair enough, right?" I glanced at the blank sheet of paper on the table, then looked up at him. No anger, no shock. Nothing left to hurt. I simply smiled. Inside my coat pocket, my phone screen was still lit up an email from my international rights agent confirming a 7-figure deal for the film adaptation of a children's book series I'd quietly been building for years. He thought I was some weak, clingy woman with no career. But the truth is, I'm a best-selling author earning nearly $500,000 a year with an animated movie hitting theaters soon and rights sold in over a dozen countries. Thomas had no idea. Danielle even less. They looked at me with pity, but little did they know at that very moment I felt more powerful than ever before. Then I spoke gently. "All right, let's get divorced." I've never seen someone so confused right after thinking they'd won. Thomas came here to break me, but he had no clue. He had just triggered the storm that would wash away every illusion he'd been clinging to. And you know what I'd been waiting for this moment for years. Chapter 2. The day I thought I was the one, I first met Thomas while huddled in a tiny cafe near Northwestern University. I was 22 at the time, dead broke living off instant noodles and dreams. In front of me sat a cold latte, a handful of worn-out paint tubes, and a sketchbook I clutched like treasure. I remember it clearly. I was drawing an old man reading by the window. No one paid it any attention until a shadow fell across my table. "You just captured something 100 people passed by without noticing," a warm, deep voice said. I looked up. A man in a crisp white shirt, neatly combed hair, a confident smile, and eyes that stared into my drawing like he'd just uncovered a secret. "I'm Thomas," he said, and without asking sat down across from me. That's how it began. He asked me dozens of questions about my art, the characters, my inspiration. No one had ever asked me those things before. When he flipped to a page of a clever-looking little fox, I was about to turn it past, but he lingered. "This fox. There's something special about it. It's alive. It has soul. Have you ever thought of giving it its own story? I hadn't. I only drew it when I felt drained, like a comforting habit. But the look in Thomas's eyes made me think for the first time. Maybe it deserved to live as a real character. He worked in marketing, told me about his plans to start his own company, to travel the world, to do something meaningful. He said, "I think your drawings could be children's books. A whole series even." When Thomas spoke about the future, he made it sound like anything was possible, even me, a struggling college student becoming a famous author. And I got swept up in it. Of course I did. We started dating, evenings wandering through art exhibits, picnics, in hidden places no one else knew. Thomas was always by my side, quietly watching me draw. Once while I was sketching a sunset by Lake Michigan, he leaned in and whispered, "You see beauty where others see dullness. You make the ordinary feel extraordinary." For someone who'd always been called too dreamy, that felt like magic. 6 months later, he proposed. A simple silver ring, a trembling hand, and a promise. "I'll build you a life where you never have to worry about money again. You just create. I'll take care of the rest." I said yes, before he even finished his sentence. The wedding was small, held in his parents' backyard. His mom strung up lights and arranged wildflowers in mason jars. My dad, who had always been skeptical of his daughter's art, held my hand during the father-daughter dance and said, "You found someone who truly loves you. Your mom and I are happy for you." That day, I truly believed I had chosen the right man, someone who saw me, all of me, and loved me for exactly that. What I didn't know was, what he loved wasn't me, but the feeling of basking in my light and pretending it was his own. But that realization was still far away. For now, I was just a young woman, dreamy and hopeful, believing I was finally stepping into a life where I would be loved the way I deserved. Chapter 3. The One Who Hid Her Own Dream. After the wedding, we moved into a tiny apartment above a bakery. Every morning, the air smelled of fresh dough and coffee. Thomas got up early for work and I stayed home to draw. He turned the spare bedroom into a little art studio, painted the walls. Pure white added extra lighting, even built a shelf for my paints using YouTube tutorials. "You're going to create your masterpiece in here," he said, wiping paint off his hands before wrapping his arms around me from behind. And I believed he meant it, at least back then. 3 months after the wedding, I earned my first $75 from a small adoptive parent magazine. 6 months in a tiny publishing house sent me a letter. "We'd love to publish Brave Little Fox." That little fox, the character Thomas once called full of soul. I cried, then laughed, then cried again. I told him, and he hugged me, eyes sparkling. "I told you. You really are talented." But then he added almost immediately, "Now I have to work even harder, so you won't have to worry about anything except creating." At the time, it felt warm. Looking back now, it feels off. I started earning money regularly. Not much, but steady. A few illustrations for ads coloring books, holiday postcards. I opened a separate account to keep business income and taxes apart. That's what I told myself. But the truth is, I didn't really know why I was hiding it. Maybe because Thomas took pride in being the provider. He told his friends how he worked hard so his wife could stay home and doodle for fun. I heard it. I laughed it off. He didn't mean harm. He just didn't know. Gradually, my income grew. The contract for Brave Little Fox turned into a full series. Foreign publishers started inquiring about translation rights. A toy company emailed to ask about making plushies. I was actually living a dream I never dared to dream. But I kept pretending to be broke, still ate ramen, still avoided new clothes, still said things like, "That's too expensive. I don't need it." Not because I feared Thomas's jealousy. I feared he'd lose his sense of purpose, that he'd lose the feeling of being the one who rescued me. He once said, "You just focus on drawing. I'll take care of everything else." And so I did. I drew. I drew so much that the whole world came to know my name, except for the man sleeping next to me every night. He never asked how much I earned, and I never offered to tell. I let him believe the few $100s he gave me each month was my lifeline. I let him feel man enough so I wouldn't have to face the hurt in his eyes if he realized. It was my money, paying the electric bill, the water, and even those little getaways he called treats for the wife. Once I tested the waters and asked, "What if one day I made more than you?" Thomas laughed out loud. "If that ever happens, I'll happily become a stay-at-home chef." He thought it was impossible. And I didn't correct him. Because deep down, I knew some truths aren't meant for everyone, especially the ones that bruise egos as thin as paper. So I hid my dream, right inside the home where I was quietly building it. Chapter 4, when my husband became someone else's dad. We had a close-knit group of friends, the kind of couples who were all in the same stage of life who went from weddings to house hunting together. Every month we took turns hosting dinner parties, just close enough to feel connected, just distant enough to pretend everything was fine. Danielle and Anthony were part of that group. Danielle wasn't just a friend through my husband's friend's wife kind of way. She had been my best friend since high school. We'd shared sleeping bags on camping trips, whispered dreams into the night, confessed our secret fears. I used to think she was the family I chose. Then, one October evening, she stood up in the middle of dinner, placed both hands gently over her still flat stomach, and smiled that special kind of smile women only wear for life-changing moments. "We have some happy news," she said, voice trembling with joy. And just 3 seconds later, Thomas, my husband, was the first to leap up and embrace her. Not Anthony, not me, Thomas. He lifted her off the ground, hugging her so tightly, I felt my heart sink. I don't remember whether I clapped or smiled or said anything. All I remember is the coldness around my wrist, like my wedding ring had just turned into a shackle. That night, Thomas couldn't stop talking about the baby, the name, the plans, the joy of having a new member in the family. He rambled on like it was his child. I cut in trying to smile. "Sweetheart, that's Anthony and Danielle's baby." Thomas paused briefly, then nodded. "Yeah, I'm just really excited. It's like we'll have someone new to love too." I didn't say anything else. But inside me, something quietly died. After that night, things got strange. Thomas started calling Danielle every day, asking about morning sickness ultrasound dates, reminding her to take her vitamins. He knew which OBGYN she was seeing, read hospital reviews, downloaded 3 pregnancy tracking apps. One day he told me the baby's the size of a blueberry today. It has a heartbeat. I'm so happy. You're happy. About someone else's baby, I asked, unable to hide the bitterness in my voice. Thomas shrugged it off. Danielle needs someone who cares. Anthony's always busy. You wouldn't understand. Oh, but I did. I understood exactly. I understood that my husband was living a life that was supposed to be ours, but he was giving it to another woman. And not in the way friends do. One day I spotted saltine crackers in his car, the kind doctors recommend for pregnant women dealing with nausea. "Who are these for?" I asked. Thomas laughed. "For Danielle, just in case she gets sick while I'm driving her to an appointment." I didn't know whether to cry or laugh. Then he quit smoking. Overnight. I had begged him to quit 100 times when my sinus infections flared up, when I coughed through winters, when I said I hate that smell in my hair every morning. Nothing worked. But because Danielle was pregnant, he threw out his entire pack. "Not good for the baby," he said. That sentence hurt more than any insult I'd ever received. One evening, I forced myself to ask, "Are you planning to be the father of that child?" His face flushed. "What the hell are you talking about?" "I'm serious. You've changed your entire life around her pregnancy. You know more than her own husband. Do you have any intentions beyond just being supportive?" Thomas exploded. "Danielle needs someone there for her. You're selfish. You'll never understand. You don't even want kids." I went silent. The truth is, I used to want children, but not with a man who gave more of his heart to another woman than he ever gave to his own wife. That night, we slept in separate rooms for the first time, and I knew from that moment on things would never be the same again. Chapter 5. In a dying marriage. A little girl saved me. Ever since that first night, we slept in separate rooms. Thomas was no longer the husband I used to know. We lived under the same roof, but like two ghosts passing one another in the kitchen. Our daily conversations turned into hollow weather reports. "Are you having dinner? Did you lock the door? Does Danielle need anything?" That last one was the only thing he seemed to care about anymore. I didn't blame Danielle, at least not yet. She was pregnant. It was natural for people to fuss over her. But my husband fussed in a way that felt unnaturally natural. He knew her vaccination schedule, her sleep hours, even that baby Harper, the name they had chosen, preferred classical music over lullabies. And then Harper was born. I wasn't there. Danielle didn't invite me. Thomas never said a word. All I got was a message, she's here. Both mom and baby are doing well. Short, cold. No one asked what I was doing or what I was feeling. It wasn't until much later that I learned. The first person to hold Harper after Danielle wasn't Anthony, her husband. It was Thomas, my husband. I don't remember how I cried that night. All I remember was the ceiling fan, whirring above, and one question playing on repeat in my head. Did I even exist in my husband's life anymore, in any sense of the word? As Harper grew, Thomas began visiting Danielle's house at least 3 or 4 times a week. He willingly changed diapers, read bedtime stories, could decipher every meaning behind her different cries. And me, I didn't even know what color Harper liked. But then, something unexpected happened. When Harper turned 4, Danielle suddenly texted me. She keeps asking to see Miss Rachel. I don't know why. I froze. I had thought I was nothing but a shadow in their world, but it turned out there was still one tiny heart that hadn't forgotten me. From that fateful day on, Harper began coming to my house every Tuesday afternoon. She'd scribble beside me in my studio, ask why foxes had to be colored orange, or why the bear closed its eyes when it slept. I taught Harper how to hold a brush. She taught me how to smile again. We bonded in the strangest way, a child who wasn't mine, and a woman who wasn't her mother, finding each other in the fractures left behind by grown-ups. Thomas didn't care. He assumed it was just part of Harper's schedule. He never once asked what happened here between me and that little girl, and I never told him, because for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I mattered to someone. Harper hugged me every time she left. One day she whispered, "I wish you were my second mommy." I held her close, saying nothing, because I knew, in this chaotic world, a feeling that pure deserved to be protected with silence. I wasn't Harper's mother, but she saved me in a way Thomas never could. In a marriage that was slowly dying, it was a child who kept me from falling apart. Chapter 6, when the betrayer could no longer hide. The doorbell rang just before 11 p.m. I was at my desk, finishing the final illustrations for a new children's book, Fingers, still stained with watercolor paint. Thomas had texted earlier saying he was out meeting a potential client, a late-night business meeting he always claimed was an opportunity too good to pass up. I didn't question it, at least, not until I opened the door and saw Anthony standing there. His hair was a mesh shirt, wrinkled, clutching a tablet like it held proof of a crime he couldn't bear to face. He didn't beat around the bush. "We need to talk," he said flatly. I led him into the kitchen and poured him a glass of water. His hands were shaking. His whole presence carried the air of someone who had just realized they'd trusted the wrong person for far too long. Anthony opened the tablet without a word. On the screen was a city map dotted with red markers and timestamps. 3 times a week, like clockwork. At the exact times Thomas always said he was working late, Danielle's car had been tracked at a well-known pay-by-the-hour hotel. My insides twisted into knots. Anthony didn't stop there. He showed me payment receipts, photos of Thomas's car parked outside that same hotel, taken from Anthony's own office window, which had a direct line of sight to the lot. I didn't say anything. I didn't cry. I didn't get angry. Neither did Anthony. We just sat there, 2 people who had been betrayed, too worn down to put on a dramatic show. We were silent like forensic analysts at the crime scene of our own marriages. "I've suspected it for a while," Anthony said hoarsely. "But suspecting and knowing are 2 different things." I understood deeply. I remembered every look exchanged between Thomas and Danielle, every hug that lasted a beat too long, every time Thomas knew Danielle's prenatal appointments before anyone else, every late-night client meeting. I had pieced these fragments together for years, but I always made excuses, always soothed myself, always denied it. Because sometimes, no matter how deep the pain runs, we want to believe we haven't been completely betrayed. That night in our quiet kitchen, we made an unspoken pact. We wouldn't confront them, not yet, for Harper. She deserved a few more years of stability before the truth crashed in like a storm. We would wait, document everything, not out of vengeance, but out of necessity, so that when the confrontation came, there would be no room left for denial. Anthony began installing cameras, backing up data, collecting receipts, recording every careless word. I observed. At group gatherings, I memorized the glances Danielle gave Thomas, the way their hands brushed when passing wine glasses, the way Thomas unconsciously referred to Harper as our girl. Once a month, Anthony would come to my house. We called it our secret meeting. He'd bring updates like an investigator, and I'd hand over scribbled notes about behaviors and expressions. We became allies, not to strike back instantly, but to protect the child caught in the middle of this betrayal. I never imagined that those cold, quiet meetings would become my strongest source of comfort in the years that followed. Anthony never asked if I was okay. He simply brought sandwiches, poured coffee, and asked what did the little one draw this week, and I'd tell him about Harper. And somehow, in the pain of two people left behind, we began to truly see each other in a way no one ever had. I used to think Thomas was the one I trusted most, but it turned out the one who understood me best was the husband of the woman who betrayed me. And I knew right then and there this war hadn't begun yet, but I was no longer afraid of it. Chapter 7. When my body collapsed. A little hand held me up. It started with dull aches in my wrists every morning. At first I thought it was from drawing too much stress from deadlines, or maybe just age catching up with me. But then, one day, I couldn't even open a paint jar. My wrists were swollen. My ankles burned so much that walking became a luxury. I went to the doctor, a long string of tests, and finally the diagnosis, a rare autoimmune disease. My body was attacking itself. The doctor said I needed long-term hospitalization. At the time, I was in the middle of several projects, book translations, licensing deals for an animated series. My career was at its peak, and my body was in free fall. I called Thomas, and in the stupidest moment of my life, I still hoped he would drop everything to be by my side, just for one day. He came to the hospital, stood at the doorway like a delivery man. No expression. Coffee in hand. "How are you? Not great," I said. "But the doctor says that's a good sign. Means the meds are working." Glad you're being taken care of." He glanced at his watch. "I've got to get back. Big project launch." I nodded. No tears. No begging. Just the first time I truly realized I no longer mattered in his world. And then on a rainy afternoon, my door swung open. It was Harper. She walked in backpack heavy, carrying a math worksheet and a box of crayons. "Miss Rachel, I came to do my homework with you." I didn't ask why. I just pulled the folding table closer to the bed. And from that day on, Harper came every afternoon. She brought books, cards, once even homemade cookies. "I made them," she said proudly. "Mom only helped with the oven. I taught her to read stories. She told me about her class. She became the only light amid the needles, bitter meds, and sterile hospital nights." One time I asked, "Why do you keep coming, sweetie? Not that I mind. I'm just surprised you're not bored." Harper looked at me and said like it was the most obvious thing in the world, "Because I miss you, and Daddy Thomas doesn't come." I went quiet. A 9-year-old girl had just said something that pierced me and comforted me at the same time. I don't think I ever loved Thomas more than in the moments I watched Harper gently wipe my hands with a warm towel, chatting about who fell at recess today. Thomas visited me exactly 3 times during my 2-month hospital stay. Each time lasted under 10 minutes. The last time Harper was sitting in the chair coloring. Thomas knocked, walked in, and froze when he saw her. "You shouldn't let her come here every day. She's just a kid." I smiled faintly. "I don't let her. She comes on her own. I guess she chooses to be with someone who makes her feel safe." Thomas pressed his lips together and said nothing more. He left like someone who knows they've lost, but doesn't have the courage to face it. The next day after finishing a card she was coloring Harper, leaned over and whispered, "Don't be sad, okay? I think you're braver than all the grown-ups I know." And I couldn't hold back the tears. I didn't have a husband by my side, no family member sleeping on the hospital couch. Just a little girl who once called me her second mom, and that very girl saved me, not just biologically. She saved me by making me feel like I still mattered, that I was still loved, that I still had a reason to keep going. While Thomas was busy with his new life with Danielle, I, the ex-wife, the old friend, the woman once labeled a burden, became the person a child chose to be with. And that was the beginning of the strength I would later use to rise and take everything back. Chapter 8. When the only one who stayed turned away. I was discharged from the hospital a few months later. My body was weaker, my movements and slower, hair falling out from the meds. But I was back in my studio starting to draw again. The first strokes were shaky, like I was learning all over again, but I knew each line, each color was how I survived. And Harper was still my light. She came over every afternoon after school, drawing, chattering, checking my emails when I was too tired. We had quiet, peaceful evenings. She never asked about my illness. I never asked about Danielle or Thomas. We just existed beside each other. But then Harper vanished one day. 2 days a week. No texts, no visits, not even a goodbye. I called. The phone rang, then stopped. I messaged, left unread. At first I told myself she was just busy. Schoolwork, new friends, new hobbies. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I brought that fear to my next check-in with Anthony. The moment I mentioned Harper, his expression darkened. "Thomas talked to her," Anthony said, voice like stone. "And he said things about you that aren't true." My throat closed. What things? Then the words spilled out like knives. That I was jealous. That I wanted to tear their family apart. That I was faking illness for attention. That I was using Harper to turn her against her real mother. I couldn't breathe. This child who once sat beside me through 100 rainy afternoons, whose tiny hand had rested on mine during IV drips, now believed I was the villain. Not because she'd changed, but because someone had fed her a twisted version of me. I didn't blame Harper. I just felt hollow. Through all the pain and sickness, she had been the only thing making me feel seen. And now even that had been taken from me. I looked at Anthony. He clenched his fists. I'll talk to her again. But right now, she's still a kid. Easy to influence. And Thomas, he knows exactly how to play with emotions. I just nodded. That night, I sat alone in my studio. In front of me was an unfinished sketch of Brave Little Fox, the little brave fox I'd created inspired by Harper herself. I almost tore it apart, but I stopped. No, I wouldn't tear it up, because I knew one day she'd understand. Understand that I was never the enemy, that I never needed to manipulate anyone to matter, that I loved her with everything I had left when the entire world had turned its back on me. Thomas thought I'd been stripped of all strength, but what he didn't know was that I was quietly gathering every piece of pain, every loss, every betrayal to prepare for the day he would pay for it all, piece by piece. Chapter 9. When he thought I'd break. I quietly launched war. I was still in the hospital, undergoing my final round of monitoring, when Thomas walked in. No knock, no warning. But this time, he didn't come alone. Danielle stood beside him, her arm looped through his like she was arriving at an elegant engagement party. Hair perfectly curled, an ivory sheath dress, and on her left hand a sparkling engagement ring, the kind I might have received on some forgotten anniversary. if everything hadn't gone to hell. Thomas wore the same suit I picked out for him years ago for his very first job interview. Only this time, he wasn't dressing to chase an opportunity. He was dressing to star in a cruel little play. He stepped forward and pulled a business card from his pocket, placing it on the bedside table like a waiter dropping off the check. "My attorney," he said flatly. "We're getting a divorce. I want everything clear, and quick." I said nothing, my hand still resting on my half-finished sketchbook. Danielle gently squeezed his arm like a subtle cue. "Go ahead. Say what we rehearsed." Thomas exhaled and spoke slowly, each word carefully sharpened like a blade. "You don't work. You have no income. So I think $1,000 a month from you sounds fair." I looked at him, not because of the money, but because of his eyes, the eyes of a man who truly believed I was useless, sick, disposable, and that he was the one bestowing a brand new life upon himself. Then he delivered the final blow with a casual shrug. "I'm tired of being tied to someone lazy, weak, and incapable of doing anything." Danielle said nothing. She just stood there, nodding slightly as if to confirm, yes. She really is that pathetic. I didn't respond right away. I just looked at them, these two people, who were once family, now standing before me like victors at the final round, ready to claim their trophy. And then I smiled. Soft, slow, calm. "All right, let's divorce." My words landed like a bucket of cold water on the script they'd clearly rehearsed for weeks. Thomas blinked. Danielle stepped back. They never expected that reaction. They wanted tears, begging, collapse, something they could use to say she's unstable, she's weak, we had no choice. But instead, I closed my sketchbook, folded it neatly, and said, "Thank you for coming. Now please leave. I have work to do." Thomas froze. Danielle looked stunned. Then they left the room without another word. As soon as the door clicked shut, I picked up my phone. Not to call my mother. Not to call a friend, but to call 3 people, my lawyer, my accountant, and my asset manager. Me, the woman they thought was useless, had just pulled the lever on a machine so vast, so well built, they never even knew it existed. The war had officially begun, and they had just chosen the wrong opponent. Chapter 10. I didn't ask for justice. I enforced it myself. That evening, I called Sarah, my trusted lawyer. A year ago, she once asked me a question. If one day you need to protect your assets from someone who doesn't deserve them, should I go ahead and hold the title for you? I laughed back then, thinking she was joking. Turns out the intuition of someone who's witnessed hundreds of divorces is never a joke. "I need you to start the eviction process," I said. "Which property?" Sarah asked, her voice pausing slightly. "The house where Thomas and Danielle have been playing pretend as husband and wife. The one I bought with my own money, the one registered under my private company." Sarah was quiet for a few seconds. Then she replied with just one sentence. "Understood. I'll start first thing in the morning." 10 days later, while I was still finishing my final treatment, my phone rang. It was the county office. The eviction order had been signed. The notice was served to Thomas. They had 72 hours to vacate the home Thomas had always assumed was marital property. The first text came exactly 1 hour later. "What the hell is this?" "You can't do this. I'll sue." I didn't respond. 20 minutes after that. "You're kidding, right? Where are Danielle and Harper supposed to go?" Now Harper gets pulled out as an emotional shield. Too bad I've seen that move before. The third message sounded like it had help from a lawyer. "Let's be reasonable. I can pay monthly rent until the divorce is finalized." This time I picked up the phone. "Thomas," I said, voice calm and level. "You've lived there for 8 years. Never paid a single dollar in rent, no utilities, no roof repairs, lawn care, trash collection. The house is legally owned by my company. Everything is by the book. You're just a guest." "But we..." His voice cracked. "We have nowhere else to go." I gave a soft chuckle. Then maybe you should have thought about that before abandoning the woman you once called your wife and asking her for spousal support while she was lying in a hospital bed. Then I hung up. 3 days later, Thomas and Danielle moved in with his parents. The cozy little house where they used to take new family photos, post home sweet home stories, was now silent, locked, and empty. I didn't have to destroy anything. I just reclaimed what was already mine. Margaret Thomas's mother used to be his most loyal supporter. But when she saw her ex-daughter-in-law hospitalized alone while her son played house with the new one like the past never happened, she stopped seeing me as the dreamy artist. She called me and said just one thing. If I were you, I'd have done the exact same thing. I hung up. No tears, no satisfaction. Just, for the first time in a long time, justice had finally knocked on the right door. I didn't need to shout, didn't need to threaten. All I had to do was follow the law. And for the first time, the man who thought I was the prey finally realized I was the one holding the leash. Chapter 11. When the truth came from the child they once used, I went to Thomas's parents' house on a Saturday afternoon. The air was crisp. The wind came in sharp gusts, like a warning that what was about to happen wasn't just a conversation. It was the official end to a decade-long lie. Anthony came with me. We didn't need to say much. A small nod as we stepped out of the car was enough. Today was the day all masks would fall. Thomas opened the door. He froze the moment he saw me. He didn't expect me to look this strong. Didn't expect me to be standing. Didn't expect me to show up. Not alone. Danielle appeared behind him, holding Harper's hand, now 16, almost as tall as her mother. The girl looked at me, her eyes wavering, not with hatred, not coldness, just the quiet confusion of a young person caught between two worlds. Danielle was the first to speak. She always was. I don't know why everyone insists on making things messy. We found real love. Harper will finally have a proper family. I said nothing. Danielle glanced over at Margaret, my former mother-in-law, and threw out what she clearly thought was her final trump card. And Thomas's parents will finally have a real grandchild. The room fell into an icy silence, and then Harper broke it. She looked directly at Thomas and with a voice steadier than any adult in that room said, "My dad is Anthony, and he's the only one I want to call my father." The air snapped. Thomas stood frozen. Danielle's mouth dropped open, and Anthony just turned away and wiped his glasses. But Harper wasn't finished. "I know everything about Mom, about Mr. Thomas, about how you lied and made me believe Miss Rachel was the bad one. It was all fake." Danielle stammered, "Harper, I never—" No, Harper interrupted. "You told me she was jealous, that she was weak, that she tried to break our family. But I know who was really there for me when things were hardest." She turned to me. Her eyes no longer wavered. They held only honesty. "I'm sorry I stayed away. I know I was wrong, and I missed you so much." I clenched my fists, but not to suppress pain, only to hold back tears. Tears that weren't born from hurt, but from something finally being healed. Danielle spiraled, trying to salvage her image, reaching to pull Harper closer. But then Anthony pulled a file folder from his bag. "Oh, by the way," he said casually, "we're actually not legally divorced. The court misfiled the paperwork years ago, and I never rushed to correct it." Danielle went pale. Thomas turned to her, shocked. "What?" Which means, Anthony continued, "You're not legally Thomas's wife. You have no shared assets, no legal protection, and if I wanted to—" He tilted his head. "I could sue for bigamy." Danielle staggered back like she'd been slapped. Thomas's eyes bulged. They looked at each other like two people on a sinking raft, neither strong enough to pull the other up. I didn't laugh. I didn't need to. Because Harper had spoken the words I never could, and Anthony had done what I never needed to. I just looked at them and said, some things don't need revenge, because the truth is the fairest sentence of all. Then I turned and walked away, and behind me, an entire fake empire began to crumble. Chapter 12. When they buried themselves with what they built. Just 1 week after that final confrontation, Thomas was fired. Not by me. I didn't have to lift a finger. The one who let him go was his own father, the head of the construction firm Thomas always bragged was his lifelong safety net. The man called me. His voice was low-worn. "Rachel," he said, "I don't recognize my son anymore. I taught him loyalty, integrity, how to keep his word. But watching him betray you and drag an innocent child into it, I realized I failed. I didn't know what to say." Then he gave me one final sentence before hanging up. "I can't keep feeding a man like that from a company I built with blood and sweat." Thomas was reassigned to a job as a deckhand in a fishing port. Grueling work, low pay, leaving dock at 4 a.m. The man who once called me useless now came home exhausted, smelling of fish, living in a cramped apartment shared with 2 other fishermen. And it didn't stop there. Word got around faster than any rumor. The business community knew the story. They called him the guy who ditched his sick wife to marry her best friend. As for Danielle, her downfall was worse. Her unmarried status stripped her of any legal protection. No assets, no rights, no support system. Her dreams of wealth evaporated like steam. Anthony wasted no time filing for custody revision. He had evidence of deceit, emotional instability, and harm to Harper's well-being. The court ruled swiftly and decisively. Danielle was granted only supervised visitation. She now juggled 2 part-time jobs to afford a small apartment across town where no one invited her to brunch anymore, and no one asked her to birthday parties. The same women who once chatted with her about minimalist nurseries, gifted toys, and modern motherhood now avoided her like the plague. Danielle had become the whispered name at PTA meetings, not the woman who won the man with a wife, but a cautionary tale, proof that affairs don't end in fairy tales. In Harper, she lived with Anthony, visited Danielle under supervision, and slowly began sending messages to me again. Sometimes just, "Miss Rachel, I'm learning Spanish now," or "I drew the fox again. Want to see I didn't expect things to return to how they were." But I knew some connections, when built on sincerity, never disappear. They may go quiet, but they always find their way back. Thomas and Danielle lost everything, not because I tore it down, but because they built it all on betrayal, on lies, on illusion. All I did was stand still and let the truth do the rest. Chapter 13. When a child came back and old wounds began to heal, 6 months after everything fell apart, the doorbell rang on a windless Sunday afternoon. I opened the door expecting nothing. But the moment it swung open, I froze. It was Harper. Not the little girl, but a young woman now. Her hair was longer, her face more mature. She held a small paper bag, and in her eyes something unspoken. "Miss Rachel," she said softly, I'm sorry." I didn't reply. I simply opened the door wider. Harper stepped inside and placed the paper bag on the table. Inside was a small box of handmade cards. On the front was an orange fox curled up in sleep, resting in the palm of a hand. Below it, a handwritten message, the letters slightly shaky. "I know now who truly taught me to be brave." We sat together in the same kitchen where she had done homework for so many years. At first the silence was awkward, but then Harper began to speak. She told me she had felt guilty all this time, that she had been misled, manipulated, chipped, as she put it, by twisted stories until she couldn't tell what was real anymore. "I believed you were jealous. I believed you didn't treat Mom well. But when I really thought back, when I was sick, when I was sad, who held me, who helped me with math, who taught me to draw that fox in the first place?" I looked at her. She wasn't the 9-year-old who once fell asleep on my lap. She was a young woman, courageously choosing to return to the truth she'd once been pulled away from. I didn't need an apology. I only needed this, that she came back on her own. Since that day, Harper has visited weekly, not as a child looking for an art teacher, but as a real friend. I told her about my plans to translate the books into more languages. Her eyes lit up. "I'm learning Spanish now. Maybe One day I can help you translate. I smiled. I'll be waiting for that day. We sat side by side, coloring a new illustration for Brave Little Fox. For the first time, the little fox in the picture wasn't alone. Beside it was a rabbit, new yet familiar. Because I understood something now. When love is built with patience, even if separated, it will always find its way back. Chapter 14. I didn't need revenge. Because my life was the answer. 6 months after that final confrontation, I stood in the middle of my new studio. Gone were the old bedroom walls streaked with paint stains. Gone were the dim yellow bulbs. Now it was a space flooded with light white walls, high ceilings, and floor-to-ceiling windows that opened to a sunlit garden. Every morning I made coffee, opened the windows, and saw myself in the mirror. No longer the frail woman in a hospital bed, abandoned and worn down, but a survivor, a victor, a woman who no longer needed anyone's approval to know her worth. My body was stronger, my mind even more so. I no longer feared the sound of the phone ringing, no longer flinched at a knock on the door, no longer trembled at the names Thomas or Danielle. They were now just footnotes in an old chapter I had long since turned. Brave Little Fox, the little character I had created on a cold afternoon years ago, was being adapted into an animated film. Hollywood had called. Famous voice actors had signed on. Licensing deals stretched from Europe to Asia. My income, $450,000 a year, sometimes more. And that house Thomas once assumed was community property. Now it was officially listed under my business. It had become the creative headquarters for my studio, where I'd hired 2 new assistants and a full-time publishing manager. I no longer lived to protect anyone from the sting of truth. I lived to shine on my own terms. Thomas once said I was lazy, useless, going nowhere. Funny. He never got to see my face while I scrolled through a bank app showing 6-figure deposits rolling in monthly. Danielle once thought I'd crumble, but she didn't know women who endure in silence are the ones who rise loudest without ever needing to shout. And Harper, she's now a freshman studying languages, still visits on weekends, still draws beside me, and every time she hugs me like I'm the last safe harbor left standing after the storm of her childhood. I don't know if I'll ever love anyone again, but I know this: I will never love someone so much that I forget who I am. I was once deceived, once betrayed, once left behind, but now I have everything: career, freedom, peace, and most importantly, I have me whole. And if you ask me when I knew I had truly won, it was the moment I watched Thomas bow his head as he walked out of the house he thought he'd own forever, while I stood behind the glass wall, coffee in hand, smiling softly, saying nothing at all. Because sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't rage. It's the fact that you live brighter than ever. In the end, she didn't need to win back her husband. She didn't need to argue with the other woman. She didn't need to scream to prove she was right. She only needed one thing: to return to herself, fully, unapologetically. She rebuilt her life with the very hands once held, then let go. She gathered every fracture and turned them into a version of herself that could never be broken. And she realized the sweetest revenge isn't about making someone suffer. It's about letting them realize they lost the most precious thing they ever had. If you've ever been betrayed, ever been dismissed, ever been left behind, remember this: no one defines your worth but you. You're watching Scarlet Vows. If you believe in stories of women rising from ruins, hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. We're here every week to tell the stories they never expected women to speak out loud.